Hi, I'm Jesse Gilstrap.
And I am Drew Cordell, and you are listening to, watching TV Binge Drinking, and we are taking a step into the unknown a little bit, into the skeptic in us all and the believer in us all.
I'm not sure I trust you, Drew.
Well, I don't either. Trust no one. Looking back at one of the biggest phenomenons of the 1990s, but also just in general in television, this was a huge force, and I wasn't even watching it at the time, but was very aware of it. It was culturally everywhere. Of course, we're talking about the X Files, and looking back on this show, we're going to be looking at every season, taking a look in different ways. And you very much have always been a huge fan of the show, so this will be a particularly special look back for you. But it's been fun for me. I haven't only seen the show. I've seen a few episodes multiple times, but like I've really only seen the show one complete time through. This has been fun for me just to go back and watch some of these very early episodes again.
In honor of us talking about the X Files, because I'm not casting any aspersions, but we've been talking about doing this for a while, and not speaking ill at all. Again, I I really have a reason to have an "I want to believe" mug even before just talking about it on this show. But I finally bought it. Finally using the "I want to believe" mug as we're talking about the show now. And for the first time, I'm using it, but it's not the first time it's been used because one day I looked up and my girlfriend was drinking out of it. And I'm like, "What? Do you have your own mugs? Why are you drinking out of that mug that I just bought?" But it's not like it's a big deal. I just thought it was kind of funny. And speaking of also uh, celebration, uh, for the first time, you've had alcohol on the program before when we're talking about Mandalorian, I believe.
Yes.
But I am for the first time drinking alcohol. I have a Screwball peanut butter whiskey
Well,
that I cracked open that I actually also bought a long time ago,
that
intending for a special occasion. Not even necessarily this, but I feel like this is a special occasion, at least for myself. That's what I'm drinking today.
well, it's and it happens to be uh, this night that I am also having a little bit of the old alcohol, just a Crown Royal peach tea, which is the new canned drink. Some of the new canned drinks that Crown has put out, they're actually really, really delicious, and you could get carried away because you really can't taste the Crown. It's like a tea, uh, but I'm only doing moderation tonight, so just enjoying this one. But yes, it is a special occasion, and the most the most drunken episode that we've done, even though it's not.
I will say this is delicious though too. I mean, peach. That sounds delicious that you're drinking because I love peach and I love tea and I love them together. So adding a little kick to it sounds great. This peanut butter whiskey though, that's the stuff. I mean, I'm a huge peanut butter guy, so definitely my type of thing. And I also like some whiskey. So yeah, this is delicious. Cheers, my friend.
Yes, cheers, cheers.
I yeah, I mean, you mentioned it. Obviously, I am a gigantic X Files fan. There used to be a time if somebody was to ask me what my favorite television series was, I would say my favorite show is Sports Night. X Files is my religion, and really, it was just a cheeky way of saying I really love the X Files. It's not literally my religion, but nonetheless, it is something that I love a lot. And well, I mean, I've watched through the entire series multiple times. I'll mention my journey with the show and try to keep it relatively short, but it started in 1993. and I was 9 years old, and that's a pretty perfect time, honestly, to be into this kind of show with spooky monsters and creatures and aliens and all that type of thing. That's pretty perfect for a 9-year-old.
Yeah.
And then I just grew up with the show, and of course, the only bad thing is we live out in the country, and to watch Fox, we had to turn the giant antenna. You turn a knob in the living room, and you hear the giant whir of the antenna, big antenna in the back spinning to get Fox, because it was a different direction than the channels we normally watched. But so it's kind of a chore, and I still always wanted to watch it as much as we could. And then, of course, when it was in syndication, I was able to catch even more episodes more frequently. And then I bought the VHS tapes when they started coming out like that. 2 episodes on a tape,
Right.
4 episodes in a collection. And I quickly thought, the show's still on the air, and I already am nowhere close to having all the episodes, and it's taking up gigantic shelf space. It's going to be quite crazy. If thank goodness that has changed, obviously. But saw the movie when it first came out, opening weekend. I still remember that it was number one on opening weekend. And that was the last weekend Titanic was in the top 10. The weekend that the X Files was number one, because that's how long movies were
Right.
at the top of the box office back in the 90s. Uh, Titanic was in the top 10 for over half a year. I remember when the DVD sets first came out, but they were expensive. Back in the day, that those DVD collections would be really expensive, like $80 to $100 for a season. And then they released the slimline set, so I was only buying those collector's editions as I could, very slowly. And they released the slimmer collections that were supposed to be, slimmer in physical space, but reduce all the special features. So I said, I don't want that. But the day that they came out, they reduced the price of the collector sets to the same price, to half the price. I guess trying to get rid of them, get rid of the collector sets, and I snatched a few up that day, and was super excited to have it, physically on DVD. And it's just funny, like how much time was put into buying all of them. And I finally had it complete when the second movie came out. The summer that the second movie came out, I finally had all the seasons on DVD. Binged the whole series, and right before watching the movie on opening night with some geeky girls that were showing me their FBI badges, a couple rows ahead of me. Then finally, of course, the Blu-ray sets came out, and that's the way I watch the show now. Even though I'm sure most people will watch it because it's on Hulu, probably
Right.
will stay on Hulu. Most people will watch it that way because that's the world we're in, taking up no shelf space. But nonetheless, that HD remaster is so crazy good, better than they ever expected the show to look. But it's how good the show always did look. That's what's so crazy about it. It was always shot on film, and one of the reasons it was such a big deal, the show itself, is that it was so cinematic, and there was so much attention to detail, and it felt like you're watching a mini movie every week. As one of the reasons it was so big. Of course, there's a lot of examples of inspirations before the series. Coach Hat the Night Stalker and Twilight Zone, Silence of the Lambs, just a couple years before the series Silence of the Lambs became a huge influence on the X Files. We'll talk about some pretty big Silence of the Lambs influence on this episode. The lasting impact that the show made is gigantic. I think it's more gigantic than some people might realize. You can't really talk about TV history without talking about the X Files. Really changed people's ideas of what you could see on TV. I mean, even the forensic shows you see, CSI and all of those, people didn't see autopsies on TV regularly
Right.
before the X Files. And suddenly you're seeing autopsies. First episode, autopsy,
Yeah.
and that was a big deal. Obviously, there's more direct influences that you can see in, uh, like Supernatural or Fringe, Lost, a lot of different shows like that more spiritually similar. But it's just interesting how many ways that the show has like branched off, and a lot of great writers and directors have gone on to do all types of things on TV and in movies. It's just this gigantic cultural milestone that changed television forever, and we're going to talk about that whole journey eventually over time as we break down the series season by season. It's just really like, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but like basically when they moved to Hollywood, the show lost some of its influence, and then around the same time, Sopranos came out
Right.
and was another gigantic leap. It's just interesting how you have these evolutionary steps in what television can be, and I think it's good to go back and to consider all that the X Files is, and I'll just say like there's a world in which we talk about the entire thing episode by episode, but that would be a lot of dedication. And I'm a type of fan that I've watched every episode and I will again. But it's a different story to watch them all and talk about them in review.
Right.
So for our ability to talk about other things than the X Files, I came up with the formula so that we could talk about the entire series. And I kind of thought, instead of watching just the most important episodes or key milestone moments or whatever, there's plenty of episode guides that are like that. I thought it would be more interesting to do a broad cross section to kind of broadly talk about the entire run. So we'll be talking about all 11 seasons in both movies. But here's the formula, as I know you already know, but the formula I came up with. First of all, two-parters count as one episode, just to simplify things in a few places. We'll watch the first and last episode from every season, and within each season, 3 of the best and the 1 worst, based on my personal ratings of the series. Because the last time I watched the entire thing, I rated every episode. So 3 of the best and 1 worst, and it was kind of hard to pick 3 of the best. Even just looking through what we watched in the first season, I'm like, oh, we're skipping this and this. Run into those sorts of things all over the place. But that's the way it goes when you try to. It's inevitable when you cut it down. You're going to miss something. I want to ask you, Drew, what I think is going to be the easiest trivia game ever. At least I imagine it is. I could be surprised, but I kind of doubt I'm going to be surprised. What is the 1 worst episode from season 1?
Uh, well, I think I gotta just take a wild stab in space on that one. Uh,
Ding, 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 ding,
yeah,
ding.
I remember that episode. I mean, obviously we'll talk about it, but I remember that one kind of sticking out like a sore thumb the first time that I watched it, and it's not even really the worst thing I've ever seen or anything, but it's definitely not up to snuff with the rest of the show that season in particular.
Yes, some people consider it the worst of the series. We'll talk about it again more specifically here shortly enough. But I do not. Spoilers. I don't even think it's the worst of the entire series. Uh, but we'll talk about it more specifically here soon enough. Things start off with, as most series do, a pilot episode, which I'll just bring up as well, that it's directed by Robert Mandel and shot by none other than Thomas Del Ruth. And Thomas Del Ruth, what a great cinematographer he is, and he only shot the pilot, which is kind of typical for a lot of television shows. So he kind of establishes, in a lot of ways, the look of what the X Files is, even though it evolves a lot. There's still a sort of natural look that he gives the show right off the bat. I don't know, trying to think of the right way to describe it, but because my brain keeps saying Silence of the Lambs, I keep going back to that. But it's not just that, it's there really is a kind of tangible feeling, like you really are in these places.
Right.
It feels like you're in the real world,
Right.
not you're in a glossy TV show. And here's Thomas Del Ruth, some of his filmography as a cinematographer: Stand by Me, Running Man, Breakfast Club. Later on, he did the West Wing from the beginning. Did 106 episodes, and the West Wing is another one of those genre-defining series, uh, legendary in terms of its look, the walk and talk nature of the West Wing. So yes, this is a guy who knows his stuff, had quite a pedigree before he ever shot the pilot of the X Files, and I think that kind of right off the bat lets you know this isn't your ordinary show. Especially if you like, it kind of had to put yourself back a little bit into 1993. Obviously, Twin Peaks had already happened by this point, which is very cinematic because David Lynch and David Duchovny is in Twin Peaks in a very not Fox Mulder role. But uh, yeah, it's I think immediately it's obvious that Chris Carter, the creator of the X Files, the writer of the pilot episode, he knows what the X Files is. The basics of what the X Files is right there in the pilot from the very beginning. Mulder and Scully, our main characters, they're very fully formed. I feel like you get a sense of who they are right off the bat. That makes a big difference when you're watching the show, to immediately feel like there's a certain level of confidence in what the show is. And I think David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson are just amazing. And obviously, we can continue to talk about them as the show goes on. But uh, I love that the show is about career adults and about real people with feelings and complexity. And I think you get that feeling right off the bat,
Yeah.
that these are professional people, but also real people. Because you watch a lot of procedural shows, and uh, yeah, they're professionals, but they are just professionals. They don't feel like real people. They might have a quirk, but that's it. And Mulder and Scully feel like real people. And part of that's the writing, and part of that is because Duchovny and Anderson are both amazing actors. And I remember Chris Carter had made commentary about not being sure that Duchovny was his guy, that he was maybe too aloof, and then realized that Duchovny was actually one of the most well-read people he knows. This is a guy who has a master's and had started a doctorate. And currently, he has written several novels, which I actually think are quite good. He's an accomplished writer, and I think sharp guy. And Gillian Anderson is uh, intelligent in her own right too. And they're both terrific actors who are capable of doing comedy and drama and action and everything, and tonally, which the X Files, as we go on, has a lot of different tonalities. Not really so much in the first season, even, but I still think you can tell that they are very adept
Yeah.
right off the bat. Um, I am. I'll stop there just to kind of turn it over to you to talk about the pilot episode.
Well, I mean, we were going to eventually talk about Silence of the Lambs, regardless, because
Yeah,
especially the next, the next episode that we talk about has a lot of influence with a particular character. But this episode, I think, just in its look, um, tone, and especially with Scully and the way that she's kind of presented. Oh, I really get that Silence of the Lamb's influence right off the bat. And but it's also handled in its own way, and it doesn't feel like this is just trying to be Silence of the Lambs either. It's clearly its own thing. Um, and it's fun when you get to look back at these things that you love or really, really appreciate and realize how much they were influenced by something else that you really appreciate that you may have not thought about when you first watched it. And I think that's kind of the case here, um, for me going back, because really when I watched X Files the first time, I was in my early 20s and I just kind of blew through them. And I didn't really, I remember really liking it, but I didn't, stop and think. I wasn't very analytical when I was watching them. Um,
And I watched it when I was 9, so I had not seen The Silence of the Lambs yet. I was just watching the cool Fox show with the aliens and stuff
yeah,
when it first started, and it's grown up as I've grown up.
right. It's like the scene, where she's walking through FBI and headquarters and gets her assignment. That felt very much similar to the opening of Silence of the Lambs with with Clarice having a similar thing. But I love that scene. Obviously, for many reasons, it does establish her character a little bit without saying too much. They're going to assign her to Mulder. She has a background, in science, and Mulder has all these controversial things in the bureau with the X Files, and she's basically there to debunk them. And she's not stupid. She points that out, when she's basically assigned to do this, and without saying too much, it's kind of confirmed. And I actually kind of forgot about Blevins. I've it'd been so long since I've watched the earlier seasons. Yeah, I remember, Skinner, I remember very well, but I kind of forget Blevins being, that early kind of authority figure.
And Skinner doesn't pop up till the end of the season.
Right, right. So it was interesting seeing him again. But of course, this scene also introduces a character that will develop as the show goes, and it's the smoking man, or the cigarette smoking man, and all he does in the scene is smoke. Uh, but talk about just being able to say so much without saying a word. He has that aura to him. If I didn't know of who he was and what he is to the show, I think I would know that he would be something to the show. And I've read conflicting things about this, because some people have said one thing and others have said another. So if I'll let you kind of answer that. But I've heard that it was kind of an accident in some ways that he ended up becoming as big as he did, because William B. Davis kind of killed it uh, with the way he presented the character. And then there are other things I've seen where it was intended for him to kind of evolve into that. I don't know, but either
No,
way,
it wasn't intended.
it wasn't intended. I like that even better.
Yeah.
And that's the way. That's kind of how I hoped it would be, but I'd read conflicting things. But either
Sure.
way, Um, just a really great introduction to him, and I love how the episode ends too. Um,
Yeah.
and kind of a
Raiders
fun,
of the Lost Ark.
yeah, I was just yeah, fun nod to Raiders, yeah. Um, but it a very different, in a more, or well, in its own way, kind of ominous way to end the episode, and way to set up where this show could go tonally. And I do agree with you. Like season one, it's kind of there are different episodes, different kinds of episodes, but it kind of has the same vibe in season
Yeah.
one, and it's kind of the chill. I almost like the word chiller instead of thriller, because it does have that spooky side to it. Um, and that was one of the reasons I didn't really watch it much growing up, was because I was obviously a little bit younger than you when it came out, and my parents didn't really want me watching it because afraid I would be scared. Not objecting to the show, just don't want you to have nightmares. Bad enough I'd already seen Jurassic
You know,
Park and was having nightmares about raptors and T-Rexes at the time, but the add aliens and and monsters and other things would just make it even worse. And I ended up seeing episodes kind of piecemeal over the years, what in
yeah.
syndication. Always aware of it.
And I will say too, not to cut you off too much, but just to say that my sister is basically your age, a couple years younger than me, and she uh, basically watched it because I was watching it.
Right.
And you're an only child, so
Yeah.
if you had a sibling 2 years older than you that was watching the show, you might have watched it by proxy like my sister did. My sister, I think, benefited from the fact of having an older brother to watch some things that maybe she wouldn't have otherwise, including Jurassic Park, and she had nightmares even though I think she loved it.
Yeah, it's a small detail of, in the grand scheme of things, being a child with a sibling and being an only child, but it could be such a different, very different way to grow up. Of obviously, and not having that sibling influence, and kind of just making making your own path in a way, and then having to face all the punishment by yourself when things go wrong as a child. But anyway, I was very aware of the X Files. Basically, the short of what I was trying to say, that over the years, that when I was younger, I definitely was aware of it, and I liked what little I knew about it. I enjoyed kind of that. I There were other shows around this the same era that I liked too, like Tales from the Crypt, and some things I like to watch late on a Friday night and kind of be scared, um, in a way.
Sure.
But I particularly found myself liking the X Files because of some of its, sci-fi elements, and I obviously was a big sci-fi fan growing up. Still am. And there is a huge plot line to this show that continues to grow as the show goes on, and I kind of forgot how many seeds were planted just in this first episode.
Yeah.
that really kind of clears the path for that. And that's what I love about this show is that it has so much of that kind of chilling, spooky side, but it also has this very strong narrative that it can switch gears.
And a sense of it being part of a larger world.
Right.
Everything matters.
Yeah. And all this to say Mulder is just a great character and Duchovny is awesome. And I like both of these characters so much. Gillian Anderson is just great as Scully, but Mulder I'm particularly drawn to just because he has that kind of hopeful energy that I yearn to have because I'm really more of a skeptical person by nature. I'm more like a Scully, I think, than Mulder, but I admire that kind of intense devotion to wanting to know the truth, um, or to seeking it that Mulder has, and
Yeah.
I think his life story as we see it and some of the tragic things about it fuel him, but they don't fuel him in the same way they might another character, another type of character. Like he lost his sister, and we learn about that in this episode again, things I didn't realize, when we were going back and watching these again, and just how much is kind of clear in the beginning.
And isn't it well done too? Like, it's very simple exposition without being overdone.
Yeah. Yeah, it really does feel like a movie.
Yeah.
And I but some people would be bitter about that. And I don't think Mulder is particularly a bitter character. I think that he has, obviously he's kind of a laughing stock, uh, or on the other spectrum, he's viewed as dangerous. It's kind of, one or the other, depending on who's looking at him. The people that have so much to hide that view him as
Yeah.
dangerous. The other people with their eyes closed kind of view him as a joke.
And a lot of people look at him as being a waste
Yeah,
in the sense that he has so much talent that he's wasting on this frivolity.
yeah, he's like a dream Thomas Harris character, a great FBI profiler type character that you would expect to be tracking down Hannibal Lecter or something, but he's focused on the stars and above and things that go bump in the night. And yeah, uh, some people would view that as a waste of talent, but there's so much to him, and there's so much to their relationship at the beginning too. And it's just as simple as when they first meet that they kind of have this tension, and it's not the sexual tension, and there is that in the show, but it's just she knows that she's there to basically kind of take him out of his position, debunk, the X Files, and kind of delegitimize his work. But she respects him, she knows about him, and she's willing to kind of hear him out. And he knows that she's there to do that too. And but they have this respect for each other, and even though she's kind of really focused on even the mystery of this episode, what the case that they're on, she's just very ready to dismiss any kind of supernatural element that is presented, but she doesn't flat out accepted all this first episode, but you know that she sees what she sees. And I just love that all this happens in the pilot, and it sets up, but it doesn't do too much either.
Yeah.
It doesn't do so much that there's no more show, but it just does it in such a way that it really gets you involved and it makes you care about them. And I honestly, this might be, if I ever had to lay out a list of my favorite pilots of all time, this one would probably be a candidate. And just because of how well it represents the show. And, sometimes pilots are. They're very rarely my favorite episode of a TV show, and I definitely don't think this is my favorite X Files episode either. But a lot of times pilots I feel don't aren't necessarily like representative of the show that it eventually becomes. Sometimes they are. And I feel like this is definitely one of those.
Yeah, this show knows exactly what it is right out of the gate,
Yeah.
what it wants
Yeah,
to be.
exactly. It's very confident. Um and I love that about it. And it is just a blast to go back and visit this again, because there's just been so much that's happened in the last, well, almost 30 years
Yeah.
since this premiered, and the show's still relevant. And obviously, there are things that are dated about it, like some of the technology. Of course, it is. It was set in the modern day of which it was shot, so people that nitpick that kind of stuff kind of get on my nerves. But
Look at it like a period piece, you know?
yeah, right. But the message and the tone and the story and the characters are timeless. I feel like you could make them work, and you could take this pilot, make a few little adjustments, set it today, and it would still work. And you can't say that about um, a lot of ideas, a lot of scripts, a lot of stories. But you make a character connect like these two do, and you can go anywhere.
Yeah, you not only have two good characters, you have a good relationship right out of the bat,
Right.
with room to grow and room to develop. And that's one of the things that you kind of suggested, but that I love about the X Files is how like so much is here, so many seeds are planted, not just sunflower seeds that Mulder eats, but seeds that are character and plot points. But like, there's a real sense that episode to episode, what happened last week still matters. And you watch a lot of procedural kind of shows, and something huge might happen, dramatic, even personal to the character, and it doesn't seem to matter next week. The next episode comes out, and it doesn't really seem to matter. And the X Files develops over time, and there's a sense that it's evolving. And right out of the gate, you get a sense of who these people are, and mutual respect professionally, but also room to test that waters and faith and science between Mulder and Scully, but in different ways.
Right.
Because Scully has her own faith, but she also has the skepticism and belief in science. And Mulder isn't beyond science; he has a very strong sense of not just forensics, but profiling, and very good at that. Very smart agent, FBI agent. That's how he got in that field to begin with, because he was so sharp at profiling. But then he's also, the believer in so many ways too. His own faith in a lot of things that are unseen, uh, or that other people, like I said, have their eyes closed to, that are out there. The truth is out there, but yeah, I feel like if I had to look at the two of them, I'm more of a Mulder because sometimes even to my detriment, I can't help but profess the truth or what I see as the truth. I feel like I have that Mulder characteristic. And maybe that's in me to some degree because I've been watching this since I was 9 years old. Um, some degree of the truth is important, and no matter what. I love how like even there are little things too where Scully just somehow manages to not see things that are magnificent. That'll change here and there, but like she manages to get like knocked out before she can get to spaceship overhead, and Mulder's there. Mulder sees it, and Scully gets knocked out. That sort of thing happens over and over again, and that's right there in the pilot. Um, I enjoy, of course, the obvious X on the road
Right.
tying into the X Files too, but like X marks the spot. It's just simple little tricks like that that do a lot of good moments in this pilot episode like that. Um, I do pick on things like I pick on that cop getting ahead, like he knocks out Scully, but somehow catches up to Mulder. Granted, Mulder doesn't know where he is in the woods, and the cop does, but still, he knocks out Scully behind Mulder, but somehow catches up to Mulder. Like he's already standing there with the gun. Stop right there. Like, how did you get there? How did you get ahead? There's little things that I could pick on, but I do think it's a very solid episode and very, confident. I think that's one of the best words that you can use to define a pilot. It's a very confident pilot that tells you out of the gate what this episode is, what the series is. I forgot to mention it because I was trying to get so much out uh, from the beginning, like so many little things that I was wanting to say that I had on my mind. The director Robert Mandel also, among his credits, did the episode Deus Ex Machina in Lost.
Ah,
It's a particularly great episode of Lost,
right.
and he directed that later on. Um, Worth bringing that up. I think he's a good director, but again, this is his only episode of the X Files. But nonetheless, the show does very much come out of the gate swinging. And I think one of the most important things is Mulder and Scully and letting you know who they are. What would you rate the pilot episode, my friend?
I think I would fall on an A minus. Actually, I think it uh, maybe doesn't take everything uh, to the top, but it's pretty confident of where it does take it. Like I said, and like you said, there are a few nitpicking things, but overall, it's just very strong intro to the series, and one of the one of the best ways that you can start a television show is to get you invested in the characters. And if you can in it like I have a rule, if I'm not invested in the characters by the fourth episode of a show, I drop it. I don't finish it
Sure.
because I feel like if I don't care about characters by four episodes in, then I there is no point in wasting any more of my time. This gets it done the first time that you meet both of these characters. You're invested. So it's one of the best ways you can start a series like this is to make it click that early on with your characters. So yeah, I fall at a solid A minus for this. I think it's a pretty great start to this wonderful series.
Well, I think this is kind of funny to me. I would give it a B plus, and I only find it funny because, like, you know, I'm such a huge X Files fan, and here I am giving a lower rating than you. But it is slight. It's just it's a really good episode, really terrific episode. and a really strong pilot in terms of its identity. But I do have little nitpicks with it, just in terms of its plotting and those little, again, nitpicky things. But it's still really good. Like it's just the show gets so much better too as it goes along. And we've talked about this, but that there's a subtle gap between A minus and B plus. Nonetheless, I would settle with the B plus. It's a really good, really strong episode that has little faults, but I do want to mention too, before we get too far ahead, Mark Snow. We don't hear the theme song in the first episode, but we do, of course, thereafter. But Mark Snow's score is there from the beginning, and I think he's one of the most important parts of the
Yeah.
series. The music is just great throughout the show, and I think it just continues to get stronger and stronger as it goes along. He also did the music to Smallville among his credits. It's another show that I enjoy a good deal. But we are jumping ahead to episode 3, which is called Squeeze. And this is the only time that I kind of cheated on my own rules that I defined earlier. Kind of cheated because I said two-parters count as one, and I wanted to talk about Tooms later on. And so I thought, well, if we're going to watch Tooms, kind of makes sense that we watch Squeeze first. So maybe we shouldn't skip Squeeze. Um, but nonetheless, here we are, episode 3, Squeeze. I will mention this too before I even mention Squeeze, just to say one of the episode we're skipping is Deep Throat, and I think it's kind of funny. I could just mention this on the season finale, but I think it's kind of funny that somehow we avoid Deep Throat until the finale and the episodes
Right.
that are picked. It's kind of amusing because he pops out throughout the first season, but we don't really see him until the season finale in the episodes that I picked. An amusing side note for an important character the first season.
Yeah.
Uh, but directed by Harry Longstreet, Squeeze, the only episode that Harry Longstreet directed, but certainly not the only episode written by this pair, Glenn Morgan and James Wong. They continue to pop up even in the episodes we're talking about here. In the early part of the X Files, they are two of the most important writers. They've done a lot of great things since the X Files, even including creating Final Destination, starting that movie series off. But they've written some of the best episodes of the X Files, and this is their first one here with the Squeeze. And I have to also mention cinematographer John S. Bartley, because he shot, but except for the pilot, every single episode of the first 3 seasons of the X Files. And like I said, we really get a sense of the look of the show in the pilot, but it evolves. And I think Bartley really defines the look of the show. You get obviously more variety as it goes along, but also a lot more use of shadow, which becomes really important in the way people think about the X Files. Going through dark corridors with a flashlight. That pretty much is what people think of when they think of the X Files.
Yeah.
Bartley is a great cinematographer. He shot a lot of Lost among his credits. I do think it's worth mentioning that both you and I love the TV show Lost. But John Bartley shot 35 episodes of the show. A lot of great ones, all the way up to the series finale. And Bates Motel, 45 episodes of that show among his credits. He's obviously a great cinematographer, and the look of the show is just so good. I don't want to keep rubbing this in, but holy cow, does it look good remastered in HD. It still blows me away when I watch this show because, shot on film, that quality was always there, and now we're seeing it. But anyway, Squeeze, first Monster of the Week episode.
Yeah.
Um, and the monster is Eugene Victor Tooms. and Doug Hutchison is freaking awesome.
Yeah.
Um, I he makes this work so much. Um, of course, one of the things that he is known for is well, Lost, but he's also besides being on Lost, he's in the Green Mile. That's the first thing that I, besides X Files, that I think of is him in the Green Mile, being this kind of seedy little character. Um, he's a little creep, isn't he,
Yeah.
Doug Hutchison? Um, I, I don't want to. I don't know. When it comes to Squeeze, there's a reason that I picked Tooms before I picked Squeeze, and it's not because Squeeze is bad. Far from it. I think it's a really good episode, but I think it mostly lives on its idea more than it does as an episode. It mostly lives in the performance of Doug Hutchison than it does in what it actually does with Tooms as a
Right.
character. It suggests way more than it actually does with him. Um, for example, when they first catch him and he's just in a vent for some reason, very easily caught. Like Mulder just like, oh, I'm here, Scully. There's no reason to be here in the first place. So wait, there he is.
Right.
I just casually found him. I just heard a noise, and there he is, and he comes out very easily. That's kind of lame as far as captures might go, as far as any cleverness in his storytelling might go. And of course, it's worth mentioning too. This is so early on in the show that the budget wasn't as there yet. Fox wasn't necessarily confident in the show to give them a budget. Um, and I can't fault the show too much for just living on its ideas. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
uh, that's worth watching in and of itself. The idea alone of this character Toombs, who's lived for nearly a century, every 30 years, coming back and eating some livers and going back into hibernation. But uh, that idea, I'm not trying to make this even sound too negative because I think it's a really terrific episode. We don't really see a whole lot of the action though,
Right.
or of any effects or anything like that. But what's there, I think, is very good. Um, Plus, obviously, you get this other side, which is other agents talking down to Mulder again. Donald Logue
Right.
coming in and just being a complete and total ass. Like he pretends to be Scully's friend, but he's not listening to her, which works because obviously that's like a lot of guys. Like he's not even really paying attention to what her feelings are. It's like, of course you want to get away from this loser. I'll help you. Like, what made you think she wants to get away from him? But I do like that dynamic. I like kind of branching out to get a sense of Mulder and Scully being part of an agency and not just being on their own. Those sorts of things work really well. There's just a lot of really good development of the characters in that way too. I think in this episode. Um, I'll turn it over to you. See what you think about Squeeze.
Yeah, this is one like that I think about a lot when I think about like the early episodes of X Files, just because, and I think about both episodes. I think about the character. Toombs is just a really terrific, slimy, creepy character, and um,
Literally.
there's an aesthetic, like an atmosphere that just kind of screams those Monster of the Week episodes, and I think these are that some of those can be great, and some of those type of episodes can be not so great. They can be they can get off the rails a little bit, maybe not deliver. A little pun there. But this this one definitely delivers. I think I love the atmosphere of this one a lot. I love the, you know, even though it is kind of lame the way they find him, I do love that nest they find.
Oh yeah.
And there's like a just an element to it that's just the story itself, and him just being around for so long, and Mulder kind of catching on to it, and um, the tension with that and that polygraph test. Um,
Plus, I think it's great when you're talking about going back in time. There's a sense of developing forensics. You get a
right.
sense of how much they know as they go to each time period.
Yeah. And, uh, it's it's just it's just done in such a way that I it really brings me back to that younger kid of me watching these syndicated episodes really late on a Friday night, and this episode kind of just screams that. But Tooms is terrifying, and going through all those murders he's committed in the past, and then his actual mutation and seeing him is even more chilling and disgusting. Um, but I think the actor, um, of course, I've forgotten that he was in Lost
Oh
until you mentioned it. But
yeah.
it, but now it just hits almost a different way thinking about it now. But
Like I said, there's so much influence from the X Files moving
right,
forward. You see these people pop up everywhere.
yeah, I I'm gonna have to watch Batman and Robin again at some
Uh,
point because I've seen that pop up on his on his credits here. Yeah, Squeeze just it hits me the right way. It does kind of give me that chill factor, but I do kind of think similarly to you about that. Maybe it doesn't go the best way it should, and I think Toombs is a better episode too. Um, but having said that, I think this one kind of falls at a where do I go? I'm gonna give it a B. I, I I was leaning either B or B plus, but I'll go with a B. But it's a pretty solid episode, and it has some good tension and a very if there was no other episode of Tombs about Tombs, um, I think you would still remember him. I think he was a very memorable character, but I think it does lack a few things that would put it over the top. But I love the ending, and it does make it stick even more that his last shot in that,
yeah.
and I love the vibe of that. So yeah, I'm gonna go with B for Squeeze. I'm gonna squeeze that one in.
Well, now we got quite a differential going. Because I'm actually going to give it an A minus. Um,
Okay.
but it's because like I mentioned having some little issues with it, similar to what you're saying. But I just dag nabbit when you talk about Doc Hutchison and just that tension and the atmosphere. Those things are so good that I it pushes it over the edge for me a little bit.
Right.
Even if I think, oh, I could see room for improvement, and I can nitpick things and laugh at it, like I said, them capturing him. The stuff that works really works, and part of what really works is that dynamic of like defining Mulder and Scully and their determination Like even Scully trusting Mulder and trusting the truth, even if she doesn't fully like believe. Like I don't know if I can buy this timeline. She can't help but follow, what makes sense too, and what feels right. And if this guy feels like he's the bad guy, right?
Right.
The way that people don't trust them. I feel like in terms of like defining what the show is, a lot of it is that. A lot of it is how much they're fighting against the grain, and I think that's in this episode a lot. And there's a lot of character building here, as well as atmosphere, that kind of pushes it over for me. But yeah, I would go with an A minus, even if it's it could closely go to a B plus as well. But I think the stuff that works really works. Even though again, we're not trying to talk too much ahead of turn, but Tooms is better. We'll get to that very shortly. But before we do, we're jumping ahead again. Jumping ahead to an episode called Ice or The Thing.
Mhm. Yeah.
Whatever. And yet, even though it is The Thing, uh, episode 8 is also uh, so good on its own that it manages to define itself. The concept works, right? Like it's such a great concept. The paranoid thriller,
Right.
uh, the tight paranoid thriller of it. Uh, it's character based, but still has that sci-fi flair. And speaking of character based, you got quite a cast.
Right.
Like holy cow, what a great cast! Um, notwithstanding any legal drama, Felicity Huffman is awesome. And also props to Xander Berkeley
Yeah.
as being a great ass. But all around, just the drama between the characters is really great. And of course, one big thing that I have to mention, he's directed many episodes, or he's directed a number, 15 episodes of the X Files altogether. This is his first one, but talk about a legacy, David Nutter.
Right.
This guy has directed some of the best television ever, ever, ever. Like what a roster David Nutter has. Um, and they call him the pilot whisperer because he's directed a pilot to a number of shows that have gone on to be successful, and also Terminator, Sarah Connor Chronicles, but a lot of shows that went on to be successful, like Supernatural, um, like Flash and Arrow,
Yeah.
Smallville. But he's also directed a lot of other TV. Directed episode of Sopranos and West Wing. Like holy cow! um, Notably, directed a lot of episodes, 9 episodes of Game of Thrones,
Right.
including infamously the Reigns of Castamere, one of the most notable episodes ever
Yeah.
of any TV show. David Nutter is incredible. What a great director. I mean, you look at the cast, you look at the director. Ice becomes this defining episode of the X Files, while also very much being the thing. But I mean, the thing is, I say it's the thing. The thing is a remake, so
Right.
it's not like there's nothing wrong with having some type of formula. What matters is what you do with it. And I think what Ice does is really great. It's great stuff. Meant to be kind of a bottle episode, but like it has so much going on inside of it. It it's very tense. I'm trying not to just go off on it, but yeah. What do you think of Ice, my friend?
This is definitely one that I really think put this show a little bit over the edge for me the first time I saw it, because this was
Yeah,
very much something that I of love.
They take something familiar and then they just do something so great with it.
Yeah, and it gives it its own voice too. And I love the atmosphere. Again, you're going to hear us talk about atmosphere a lot
Yeah.
this whole series, but particularly these the first few seasons, especially when they were in Vancouver filming, because the way everything looks, and then the lighting and cinematography and everything, but just the isolation. And this is true of every thing connected to this particular story that we're referencing, which is, the novella Who Goes There, and then the original Thing from Another World, and then The Thing, and then The Thing again, and and now this episode, Ice. But it's about isolation. It's about paranoia, um, and just terror in and of itself in that isolation.
Yeah.
And
And of course, you get that character that doesn't want to admit that something's going on with them and something's wrong. That kind
right,
of zombie thing too.
yeah, and you get alien worms, and you get uh, this isn't connected to the mythology of the show,
No, but
but there are things that kind of reflect where that will go, namely that Mulder is very much wanting to go back um, here later, and wants the worms himself, and later it's been destroyed. That kind of goes back to the government hiding all these things.
he wants hard
um,
evidence to be able to prove
right,
the existence of the strange and paranormal.
yeah, and this captures that perfectly. Talking about that cast, I kind of love Xander Berkeley. He really does play. I was thinking about it when you called him an ass. Like, I'm trying to think of something he's in where he's not one, but it's really hard.
He's great at it,
Uh,
isn't he? Like,
he's really good at it. Yeah.
and he's so great
Uh,
at it that when people are questioning, like, is he one that's infected? And it's like, no, that's just him. Like,
um, and I really enjoy him in this episode. But I just love the atmosphere. That I love, you know, The Thing. I love that movie so much. The John Carpenter version, and I love stories like that. I don't know why exactly I do. Because I haven't really found myself in a situation like this before. So I don't have any connectivity to it. Um, as far as being like trapped, and I hope I never do, in a you know a remote, snowed in, iced in area.
well, it's just great to have that paranoid thriller, the tight drama. It's the Hateful Eight.
Yeah,
It's, I mean, in a certain way, it's even 12 Angry Men. It's that
right.
tight drama in a room of
Yeah,
characters battling it out, philosophy and, talking out details, drama of it. And when it comes down to the characters, that's what makes it really work. What really works is when you have great character work.
yeah. And there's something about watching watching a show or watching an episode about an infection or a creature that
Oh, yeah.
infects, and debating, people debating, oh, I just want to leave, and oh, you might infect other people.
I hate how much quarantine has popped up in my television and in my movie watching in the time since COVID.
Right. Yeah, but it hits different.
Yeah.
Um, maybe someday we'll do an episode where we watch movies about contagions and stuff, and talk about what we thought of them before all this and what we think now. But it always is. It's weird. I've also been rewatching another show that I really like, 24, which Xander Berkeley is an ass in. Uh, but
Or you could just say Xander Berkeley is in it.
yeah, he's in it. Self-explanatory. But it has a whole season that deals with viruses. It's not one of the better seasons, but it hit a little bit differently. Obviously, this isn't quite a virus. It's you know extraterrestrial worms that infect and parasite. But it's so weird how different these kind of things feel now in watching them now after this pandemic, and how it hits different.
Yeah.
And the tension makes it even more believable, knowing that because a lot of times we talked about this when we reviewed Jaws,
Right. Yeah.
that I didn't really ever buy. Oh, there's nothing wrong, or there's nothing wrong in the water. We're going to keep the beach open. I never bought that.
Because why would you ignore something so obvious,
Right.
you know?
And then when you have stuff like this in this episode, um, it's the same thing, and it hits. And maybe, I don't know. I don't particularly remember, not believing, like Bear as a character, uh, when when I first watched it, but
The everyman pilot guy.
you know, yeah. But now you can kind of see, even if you wouldn't agree, or even if you don't, can believe that someone would be like that, because you see it every day now.
Yeah.
Um, so it's weird watching it in a modern time, in this pandemic era.
Even the battle between medical doctors and the FBI, the government,
Yeah,
you know?
there's a lot to pack in. I do. I just love this episode. I wouldn't go so far to say that it's even my favorite of this season, but it was a really strong one that stuck out with me the first time, and it hit me harder this time. Um, that I just kind of, the vibe and aesthetic that I love, and so I'm gonna give Ice. I'm trying to be really careful with my ratings, because we've talked about, like, in the end of the day, or what we say is more
Yeah,
of what we feel than the rating. It's just kind of a fun part of it. But I don't want to be the guy that always gives everything the same grade,
sure.
or that so I'm trying to be, to scatter out uh, my ratings a little bit. But I think I am gonna go ahead and give Ice an A. I just really enjoy it, and it really, again, I'm gonna sound corny as hell here, but I love the chiller aspect of the show, and you can't be any more chiller than in Ice.
when it comes to like ratings, I mean, like they matter and they don't at the same time, right? You know, what you would give
Right.
something. It does matter, but what you say matters even more. It the only reason it gets tricky is when people say, "Oh, how could you give this one a higher grade than you give that one?" And it's like, well, you have to look at everything for what it is, as opposed to constantly playing the comparison game.
Right.
So you have to take everything at face value. We're exactly in the same rating for Ice. I give it a solid A. And I have to mention that it's also written by Glenn Morgan and James Wong.
Right.
They just keep popping up. They are. I think that's also worth mentioning. It's so well written. Um, everything's everything in this episode is just really strong, really well constructed. Great character stuff. Um, very well plotted. You have just enough sci-fi stuff. You don't need all the. I mean, the thing partially works. People talk about it in terms of the effects. You know, the really great creature work. But you know, you look at ice, and you don't need to have really wild creatures running around. You know, because what works is the drama, and it works in a thing as well, in the same way.
Right.
And that's what makes it, sing. That's what is at the core, is that sort of tension, and ice is also really great because of that drama, but also the way that it defines its characters. Even if this wasn't the X Files and you just watched it unto itself, it's a good drama. But if you think of it in terms of the X Files, like Mulder and Scully get really well defined here, and it really helps build their relationship together.
Right.
And it's one of the reasons that I like it so much, is because after they go through something like this, think about how much it brings them together. Not that they haven't been fighting together to some degree even before this, but yes, that really makes a big difference for the character building. Um, we're not skipping ahead because we're going directly to the next episode, episode 9, Space. I'm so sorry that I decided we're also going to talk about the worst of the X Files, but we're going to. And yes, I do not think this is the worst of the X Files like some people do, because if people think this is the worst, then they're missing a few things down the road. We'll get to that when we get to later seasons, but Space is plenty bad on its own. you know, and I think one of the I think it's funny that they tried to um they tried to make an isolated kind of episode, to try to keep the budget back early on in the show. They, like, again, like, as the show, Fox had more confidence in it, they'd give it more of a budget. This is one of the earlier episodes, right? So they don't necessarily have the same budget as the later episodes do. So they're like, well, let's try to keep it kind of tight. And it ended up being very expensive because of building a control room and all this stuff. So, like, I think it's maybe the most expensive of the entire season. So, like, it's funny how that kind of works out sometimes against shows, the best laid intentions. And on top of that, it's very expensive and it's bad. Like, it's the worst episode of the season, and it costs a lot of money. It's just extra funny. Um, Worth mentioning that it's directed by William A. Graham, and William A. Graham directed one more episode of the X Files, and we're not talking about it. Or sorry, directed 3 total, because he also directed one later on. Um, but he directed EBE in season 1, and we will not talk about EBE, but that is a really terrific episode. That is also the episode that introduces the lone gunman.
Oh
Um,
yeah. Yeah.
and it's a great episode. Um, I thought about including it, but that's the hard decision making that you have to make
Right.
when trying to be selective. I only bring that up to bring up the fact that William Graham has done good stuff. I don't want to like entirely discredit him. It was written by Chris Carter, the creator himself. And I feel like in many ways, space is kind of the worst tendencies of Chris Carter lived large because, you have this idea that could be interesting. Like, oh, look, there's a picture that kind of looks like it's a weird face, right? Like, you sometimes look at pictures of undersea stuff or deep space and oh, that looks like a creepy face or something. We create meaning in something that's not necessarily there.
Right.
But here it's like, oh, and it's actually a ghosty kind of alien face that haunts a spaceship and haunts this guy and makes his face morph when he's lying in bed. And what's really bad is, or makes it extra bad, is the feeling that there's not much story. So they hold on these moments.
Yeah.
They last forever. There's not enough story here uh, for it to work. Oh my goodness. Like, I feel like when he's lying in bed and you see that like alien ghosty thing like morphing on his face, it's like never feels like it's going to end. And then the sound itself is awful. Like, all respect to Ed Lauder, the actor who plays the Colonel Belt, former astronaut who's leading this current mission in this episode. But I I don't know if I want to blame him or if I want to blame the bad writing, but I think I'm mostly going to blame the bad writing. Like, he doesn't have a character to play,
Right.
but it's not like the performance is great either, but he does not have a character to play.
Right.
It's just like Mulder. See, there's these core ideas that could be interesting. Like, Mulder is, he looks at a former astronaut as a hero. Like, okay, sure, I guess that that makes sense. I can understand that and respect that. I also love NASA space program and space exploration, so I can respect that. But man, is it just not handled well in this episode because there's nothing to it when you actually meet the astronaut. He's just constantly like scared. He's constantly like this unsure guy, and you don't know why anybody's allowing him to run the ship because it doesn't seem like he ever has control.
Yeah.
Um, and on top of that, on top of the episode itself being bad, there's also like a real life history of the fact that they use footage of a liftoff for a ship that like in the episode itself, they talk about how it won't be able to survive reentry, and there's the actual shuttle that they showed actually disintegrated on entry 10 years after the episode. They when they actually showed footage of
Right.
because of the same stuff they talk about in the episode. It's just kind of crazy. It's like, wow, this is a cursed episode of TV, not just the bad one.
Right.
It's also legitimately cursed. as much as you could believe or not believe in that superstition. But yeah, um, I just find that kind of fascinating. Um, I agree with you that it's not the worst thing I've ever seen, but boy, do I not like it. Um, there's just so much that's just not good in it. And the fact that they built these sets and things for it too, it just the sets themselves even feel empty in a way at times. It doesn't feel especially impressive to me, and that's kind of funny. This in terms of waste of resources, not much for them to go on in terms of a story. Um, I'll turn it over to you to talk about this fantastic episode of television.
Well, there's another little bit of kind of unfortunate trivia here that makes this episode maybe even slightly more cursed. is that William Graham and Ed Lauder died the same year in 2013. But I'm not blaming this episode on their deaths, though. But
And the number 13 too, if you want to
yeah,
get
well,
superstitious about that.
yeah, maybe they were in a theater and referred to Macbeth as Macbeth too. Who knows? Uh, but but
The Scottish play, the Scottish
yeah,
play.
the bards play. But regardless of if the episode is cursed or not, it is. Uh, I would say a pretty mediocre is a nice way to put it. Uh, Milk toast X Files episode. There are concepts, there are things about it that I think on paper kind of could be done well,
Of course.
or
Yeah,
could be something,
yeah.
but I don't think it's ever something. So it all gets thrown in here. I like the idea of this character, this colonel, of being, not just a hero for Mulder, but I've always kind of, I mean, we people that grew up loving astronauts, and I think we kind of fall in the back end of that generation
Yeah.
because now that's not the same thing that it was.
No, space travel
Uh,
is in the hands of private industry as opposed to the government,
right.
big charge.
And now, like, astronauts aren't kind of the super stars that they were at the time,
No, they're Jeff Bezos.
especially earlier than us too. The earlier generations, especially. Obviously the Apollo 11, uh, Apollo 13, those missions. And Apollo 13, the astronauts are famous for a failed mission, but surviving it. But I'm kind of going a long way about saying that this belt is just, talk about not being a like a firm, confident kind of character. This guy is just bumbling and and crazy, and not in a way that's captivating. He's
Uh,
just
Sweaty and
annoying.
confused.
Just oh, like that kind of energy. It was hard for me to watch this the first time. It was a lot harder for me to watch it this time. It's almost embarrassing. Uh, and again, I don't want to hate on Ed Lauder for this because, like you said, he really doesn't have much to go on. But it's like where he did go, just oh man,
And plus, like, I don't mean to like cut back too much on this, but because you could still say, no matter what, you should try to give a good, compelling performance, even no matter what you're doing. But then you think this is episode 9 of the X Files, and if he knew that he was part of what was going to be a huge legacy and a huge show, then maybe he would have done something different.
right?
And at the point that he's doing this, the X Files isn't a thing yet.
Yeah, and like a lot of these earlier episodes, they kind of have, some of them excel. Like we're already talking about some really good ones, but some of them do kind of fall short, and it does, feel that, maybe they didn't know what they had yet, kind of feel into it, or maybe they didn't know what they were in, referring to actors and stuff. And you can definitely chalk it up to that, I think. But it's just, you're right. Like some of the shots and the scenes we stay with, and just the awkwardness of the way it's executed, there's really it does go on far too long, and in a way that just is very almost uncomfortable to watch. Uh,
And I think that my rating might be influenced by the idea that I've had to watch, or not had to, but I've watched it multiple times, and just the anticipating trying to sit through it again makes me not like it. Like it influences my opinion even more. I think the rewatchability.
yeah, it's definitely I it had definitely been one I had not watched a second time or more. So until now. So I think I saw it on TV. Um so I guess I did technically see it again, but saw parts of it and remember just being like, "Oh no, that episode." So if I have that feeling about it, it kind of tells you where I might fall to. But I'm also, like I'm trying to think of positive things to say. I really am, because I'm not going to give it like the worst grade I can, because I don't think it's that bad. But it's just sometimes when you fall in that middle mediocre category, and I'm gonna be really nice and give it a C. Um, but to me, sometimes it's more harsh to give something a C than it is to give something an F, because at least when you give something an F, you're just saying it's especially bad. It's so special in how bad it is. When you give something a C, it's just like, it's not good. It's not bad. It's just kind of there. Sometimes it feels that way, and I feel like it feels that way given this that it's. I mean, Mulder and Scully are definitely in it, but it's not an episode where they're explored too much. And
No, it's not character based.
no, and so when you don't have that, and you have what you have, it doesn't really take it to another place. So yeah, I'm gonna fall there. I can't wait to hear what you give it, because I'm kind of on pins and needles for this. But yeah, I'm not gonna hate on it too much, but it's really hard to kind of defend it. I don't want to. I was trying to give it like a good pat on the back, like at least it did this, but no, I don't really have anything to say about that. But in terms of, I mean, again, the positive things I have to say is like in concept, the idea of this colonel being affected by this this face. Uh, okay, maybe the face concept isn't my favorite part,
There you go.
but the idea of coming in contact with something from space, and it doing having these effects later on. In, of course, the Challenger, they reveal it was Belt and that face that messed it up, which would be really disappointing to the kids that saw that disaster happen on television. To find out that it was the guy with that face that caused it, I think. Again, I just made light of the Challenger disaster, so I'm sorry about that. But but yeah, I th- there isn't much to say. I do remember this episode, but that's about the most I could say about it. I can have the reaction, "Oh no, that one." Um, and again, it's not the worst. But it's not good. So that's where I fall.
Um, I'm just curious. Do you have your phone on you?
Yeah.
I texted you a picture from the episode, and I know you probably already have it in your mind, but
I actually had it pulled up on the laptop as
oh,
well,
there you
but
go. Yeah,
yeah, it's looking at me both ways.
it's hard to escape that sequence, that moment. Um, I will give the slightest of praises to uh, Susanna Thompson, who plays the underling to Colonel Belt, Michelle Jenneru, I guess you pronounce her name. Um,
Right.
I mean, she's a more pleasant personality, but it's not like she's actually a character. She's mostly just the person that's not as uncomfortable to watch as Colonel Belt. But she also gets the unfortunate task of running out and being like, Mulder and Scully, we have to go all the way back. And for some reason, like we've already left and have to spend a long time even getting back. And I think that's another part of the episode that I hate is the fact that like there's so little meat there. There's so little story and it drags. And then what is there in terms of the actual substance of it, if you can call it that, the actual story is so uncomfortable. The face, the like ghost alien face or whatever it is, which is not clearly defined, it's just there's this ghosty sort of alien kind of thing that's also on Earth, but then it makes them jump out a window, but it also floats away.
Right.
I don't know what's happening. Um, golly, it's an uncomfortable episode. Um, honestly, like I've watched it more times than you, right? Like I've watched the entire
Right.
series a few times, and because I'm a completist, I don't want to skip stuff. But I've often like tried to like if I'm watching it, like I'll watch it and maybe busy myself if I'm gonna do the whole thing. But even then, I look up and hear like again, I love Mark Snow, but like the sequence dragging out and it's like tense music, and it's that like that face just morphing on top of him, and I'm like, oh no, please make it stop. I feel like I'm being cursed by the episode in some ways. I would give it a D plus. That's not the lowest grade you can give something, but I still feel like it falls down into bad. I don't feel comfortable calling it mediocre. I feel like it is pretty firmly bad, you know. So to me, bad goes down to the D territory.
Yeah.
But I will be friendly and say it's a D plus. At least I would go so far as to give it a D plus. Um, that's as friendly as I'm willing to be for a space. Um, but that being said, we're gonna skip ahead the well a decent amount of 4 episodes ahead to what is regularly considered to be one of the series' best, and we're gonna have a couple in a row here that are also taking us back to Ice. David Nutter as a director, and Glenn Morgan and James Wong as writers. Surprise, surprise, that's a tremendous pair. And also take us to territory that is very Silence of the Lambs, Beyond the Sea. I'll turn it away immediately. See some of your thoughts on Beyond the Sea.
Well, this was, I think, I'm trying to think back because now we're going to have to, when we get to these other seasons, I'm going to have to remember exactly where certain episodes kind of overtook other ones as my favorite. Um, but I do
Like
know
as you watched or just over time?
as I watched,
Sure.
and I know that this one was like the early champion. Like the first time I saw it, I was like, okay, that is th- easily the best thing I've seen from this show so far, and
Yep.
I loved it. And it has so many things going for it. The story is very emotional, um,
Personal.
personal, intimate, and we're really in Scully's headspace. But we also kind of play a switch game where the regular skeptic is the believer and the believer is the skeptic. And I like those kind of dynamics. I like when we're playing reverse roles. And that's only a small part of it too. We're talking Scully losing her father. I really like her father. I really like Don Davis. I just there's something about him that's really personable, and you can like see him being a good dad.
With very little screen time.
Yeah, very little, but it's very it, it hits you that way though.
Yeah.
I love those slice of life moments in stories sometimes that it's not really a big scene, but it ends up being so important. Like just the little scene with her parents. Another big element that this has the Silence of the Lambs element, which you've already kind of mentioned. We're talking a great actor, one of the I mean, he's just very versatile. He could play any kind of character, I think. You could talk about him in Deadwood
Yes.
and then bring up the fact that he's Chucky. Uh, can talk about his little mid '80s tenure with Lynch between Dune and Blue Velvet. You can talk about The Exorcist 3,
Yes.
which I feel like is a very extremely underrated movie.
If you weren't gonna bring it up, I was.
That's and I actually was going to mention where I think about it as much as I do Silence of the Lambs when I think about it, and part of it is because of his performance, but there are also similarities in the story of The Exorcist 3 with Silence of the Lambs as well.
Yeah.
It all kind of fits, and I think he's a perfect fit to play Boggs.
And Chris Carter fought for him too because he was gonna cost more than a lot of people would it cost at that time in the series. So he had to really fight Fox to be like, we it's worth paying for him.
and it was. I He's so good in this episode. I And then of course you've got the song, which is the title of the episode. But the way it's used, um, and where we go with that, and the connection to Scully and her father, and Boggs getting in that headspace. I love that. I love any time that you can take a character that is very strong in where they are, and you get them to question things, and you get them to wonder if they're as capable as they actually are. They start to question themselves. I think you're really examining a character as a person. It's not just someone to execute a plot or someone to save the day. You're looking at them as if they're a real person, because we're all fallible and we all question ourselves. And I think when you're getting into that deep dive, even if it is just for a 45-minute episode of television, you're going to do something special. And I love the way that they kind of dig into Scully here. I I said I was drawn to Mulder at the beginning more than Scully, and that is true. But Scully was a character that I really began to love more and more as the show kept going. And this was obviously the episode that just kind of knocked it out of the park in terms of, me just completely falling for the character. And Gillian Anderson is just amazing. And she's amazing in general, but this episode, it's just so good.
And a huge part of it is just seeing her be vulnerable because
Yeah.
there's the possibility that you could see her as kind of an antagonist
Yeah.
at the beginning of the series. Obviously, she's one of the leads. She's a protagonist, but you know what I mean. Like the skeptic, the person that's questioning what's happening. There's a potential to see that as antagonistic, and here she's the believer
Right.
and vulnerable. You start to see her as her.
Yeah. And as you painted it right there, that's why it sings to me so well. It hits, and you kind of have, there is a case, and there is we have a kidnapper and a connection to Boggs, and that's the kind of Silence of the Lambs element of it, that we're talking to this guy trying to get leads on person we're trying to catch. And while that is a huge um, element of what's going on, it's very much the character stuff that's at the forefront. And I think, and it makes all those things um, very tense and very suspenseful to watch too. And when you have the characters driving your plot, that's what you don't want, your plot driving your characters, and this just excels. I love this episode. I was really excited when I saw it on the list. Of course, I figured it would be,
Right.
because
If
I
you're talking
knew,
the
yeah,
best.
yeah, we're talking the best of it. But I'm going to give it an A plus. I really, maybe I'm throwing a plus out too soon. I don't know, but this is definitely going to be the only one I give this season. I think maybe, but there's one that's close.
You do you.
And we're talking, yeah, me do me, yeah. There's, but no, I do love this episode. Like I said, I was really excited to watch this one again, and again, I've been through. We've all lived different lives as years gone by, and you have experiences, and you have things you've been through that make you relate to things a little differently, and you can hit emotionally in a different way than it did the first time you saw it, and that's very true for me in this episode. Um, and so yeah, I was, forgive me, I was about to go into things a little bit, and I kind of teared up, and I decided not to, about my personal life, but I just, um, this episode kind of spoke to me, is basically what I'm trying to say this time. So um, definitely, whenever something touches me like that, I'm gonna take notice, and give it props, and definitely this is an A plus.
And that's the power of art, isn't it? Like
Yeah.
the power of connection, um, relating to things, relating to other people and experiences, and the shared human connection we have. Um, that's part of the beauty in this episode. I mean, like when you think about, golly, how haunting that is when she wakes up on the couch, sees her father before getting the phone call. And I swear, like, it's a weird thing. I've had, grandparents pass, all my grandparents have passed away. I was fortunate enough to know all four of them. But I'll never forget, like, my first grandfather passed away, and my dad called, and I knew immediately what he was going to say. And I told him before he told me.
Right.
And there's something that's just so haunting about that. It's like you can see it and sense it. Um, and that's what, can bring out the believer. What brings out the believer in Scully in this episode. Um, and also, like, this is the best episode of the season, easily. One of the series' best episodes, but I think it's handily the best episode of the season, too. A huge part of it is, like, I think the show comes out with a strong identity, but there becomes a point when you realize that it's actually art.
Yeah.
And there's actually character that's, I mean, I think there's character from the beginning, but I think you understand what I'm saying. Like, you start to understand them even deeper and in an even richer way, and it becomes something even more. And that's part of what Beyond the Sea does, because it still does a supernatural thing. So much of horror ends with the idea that the boogeyman might still be there, or the monster attacks and we kill it before it can get us. And in this episode, the supernatural thing is like almost a tragedy.
Yeah.
And the guy that maybe is a monster in some ways is very obviously not just a monster
Right.
and has something else going on. And there's something like heartbreaking in that electric chair sequence at the end when he looks out there and does not see Scully.
Right.
But then, of course, she also echoes the words of her mom in saying that she didn't need to hear what her father had to say to her because she already knew. There's something really just beautiful about that. Like, I know. Because I think we can spend too much energy thinking about what we could have said or not have said. Sometimes you just feel it. And without having to necessarily have to hear it word for
Right.
word. Um, I think it's worth pointing out too. Beyond the Sea, the song, Bobby Darin, good song. Um, One of the writers of this episode, Glenn Morgan, his brother, is named after the singer of the song, Darren Morgan. Darren Morgan will pop up later as one of the best writers of the show. Glenn Morgan himself is one of the best writers, and Darren pops up later on as one of the best writers of the show. But I think it's pretty evident what I'm maybe getting at here, which is uh, the writers of the episode drawing from themselves too
Right.
in the writing of the episode. Yeah, no, this is incredible TV, and it's very smartly written, very well directed. You have Mulder not really playing such a big part at all
Right.
uh, in the overall narrative, but his role is important nonetheless.
Yeah.
Like his
Very.
role as the skeptic is incredibly important, and it's character based because we get to see him less as the believer and more as the great profiler. Hence his tremendous distrust. He doesn't want to believe the hocus pocus because he believes that he has the profiling right. I just think that everything about this is beautifully executed, so it's an easy A plus. One of the best ever episodes of TV. We're gonna jump ahead though to the biggest jump that we've made so far
Right.
from 13 to 21. But we're gonna continue on our journey. Different tone, by the way. We'll shift our tone to Eugene Victor
Yeah.
Tooms once again for The episode simply called titled Tooms. So the tease at the end could have just been left there and it would have been fine, honestly, because a lot of X Files end that way. A lot of horror ends that way with the idea that
Right.
the monster might still be there. But in this case, we get the cleverness of him being released. And I think that's even better than an escape because it kind of continues the narrative of like him being clever, but also like the idea of what he actually is being so absurd to everybody else that they just can't buy it. And also goes back to that idea that I was talking about in terms of Mulder, like and why I relate to him to some degree when he goes off in the courtroom
Right.
and he's like, "Here's my profile. Here's why he's such a dangerous character that we can't trust. Look at this all the way back to 1903." And instantly nobody believes him because like he's not been around for 90 years. Um, but yes, that's the believer who says, "I don't care if people believe me so long as I'm stating the truth." I think that's really well done here. Just as it's well done to have the pushback from the government, that's really important. Because I think that's also part of the DNA of the series is that kind of struggle that Mulder and Scully have to get any headway. Not just because there are forces pushing against them, although there are, and the cigarette smoking man is right there. William Davis is right there smoking a cigarette. And what I think is one of the best moments of the show is when he's like, "Do you believe him?" Like, of course I do. When cigarette smoking man says, "Of course I do. Of course I believe him." I just think that's tremendous. It doesn't mean they're going to give him a break, but it's like, of course I believe that they're telling the truth.
Right.
I think that's great. And plus, especially great that he's saying it to the introduction of Skinner.
Right.
Walter Skinner, assistant director, is introduced in this episode. Mitch Pileggi is awesome. Um, I think he's immediately great, even though there's no sense of necessarily where he's going to come next,
Right.
how he's going to evolve in his relationship with them. Except that the seeds are there. The what they are eventually going to do with him, it's absolutely there because he hears CSM call him or to say that, of course I believe him. So the assistant director Skinner's thinking like, wait, what do you mean you believe him? But we're also not giving him a break, and we're talking about shutting him down still. But you believe him? I don't quite know what to make of this. So I think the seed is there to doing even more with Skinner, which is pretty awesome. Um, but yes, we're back to Doug Hutchison, back to his creepy portrayal of Tooms, but we also get even more action.
Yeah.
A lot more done with effects, a lot more done with really fun sequences, and all the way up to that finale, which is the one of the most memorable parts when they go into where he's hibernating and he comes out for the attack,
Right.
which is just super creepy and awesome. And Hutchison went for it. Uh, Refused to have any sort of clothing or anything covering him. He just went full nude, which meant that they had to like be careful in the editing and shooting of it to make sure that they didn't see anything because it's broadcasting on Fox, but network TV in 1994. But yeah, no, he's so good as a character. I think he's just as good in both episodes, honestly.
Yeah.
But it's just a chance to get to see it in an even better episode in the case of Tooms. And the further development of how crazy Mulder's theory sounds and how that's used against him and how they still kind of manage to find a way. Plus, I have to mention the older detective that they go back to who
Yeah.
at the end of the episode is in tears because he's so happy and squeezed that they captured the guy, that they captured Toombs. that he's been haunted by for so long, and then he's escaping, and he becomes a part of the plot in this episode.
Right.
He actually goes along with Scully as they're investigating. I just think that that's really well done. Um, what are some of your thoughts on Tooms, my friend?
Well, it's cool to kind of see a sequel
Yeah,
episode that's not a part two, like in sequential, like it's not a two parter.
not traditionally, no, not at
Yeah,
all.
but this character from earlier on, we get to see a continuation, and like you said, it is very well done how they choose to not go with the tease of him escaping, although they still play with it because he is thinking about doing it, but he ends up just getting released, um, which is better. It's a good subversion there. um, I think a lot of times I've in my mind I refer to this one as the Dirty Harry Mulder episode. Uh, the way that he ends up following him around, like Callahan follows Scorpio in a Dirty Harry. But I love that obsession. I love like Mulder knows exactly who Toombs is, what he's capable of, what he is, and no one will believe him. And he knows he has to stop him, and I love that at any cost kind of attitude that the character has, because you're so invested. I mean, obviously you're invested in the character anyway, but you're particularly invested in this case because of the previous Tombs episode too, and they carry it on in a way. It doesn't feel like, oh well, this will just be a you know another episode that just happens to have the same character in it, the same monster, the same killer. No, it actually feels like a continuation of the other episode, and I think that's really brilliant. I love Skinner as a character, and Mitch Pileggi is, as you said, just really cool, really awesome, and I love who he is to this show. And obviously, he's not quite that guy yet, but like you said, that's kind of setting up things to come in small ways. And he is, for his early tenure, very much kind of an uneasy alliance, and for Mulder and Scully, and not knowing whether they can trust him or not. And I think this is a strong introduction to him. And I was going to mention that scene if you didn't, and again, Smoking Man, William B. Davis, just awesome. uh, but that, of course, I do. Of course, I believe him. I love it. Um, it speaks so much to what hasn't even been explored in the show at this point. Uh, Seeds are planted about where things are gonna fall with Smoking Man and what he thinks of Mulder and Skinner and just all these things. And it's so fun to come back and watch them and see it in an episode that's about Tombs. but
Right, right, right.
it's just really well done. I completely agree that this is a better episode than Squeeze, and I really liked Squeeze. Um, Even though I put it down just a notch, I might be about to contradict myself. No, I'm not. I'm gonna give this one an A. It's a very very good episode, and I do love the intensity and action of it. And just Hutchison just going all out naked.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
yeah, but it really does add to it though. It makes it. You can kind of tell that there's discomfort, and uh, and that adds to performance. And
Right.
I
Yeah.
and I just I also love that scene as well. It's probably one of the best like uh, endings to an episode like this in the series. I would say like it's one of my personal favorites anyway. It's just really thrilling, and man, I love Toombs, and I love coming back to him as a character because I remembered him, and I've seen him mentioned like in a lot of stuff I've read over the years as being like one of I think Neil Gaiman has mentioned him as being one of his favorite monsters. Just which is just an incredible compliment right there. But actually come back and watch these episodes and see him again. I was absolutely thrilled, and yeah, I really enjoyed Tombs. Yeah, solid A.
I'm right there with you. I give it a solid A. It's. I mean, I could possibly be convinced to go even higher, as many episodes are on that kind of sliding scale. But I'd ultimately go on a solid A. But it's so good.
Yeah,
It's just a really fun episode, and Doug Hutchison is obviously a huge, huge part of that. If I have any pushback, I mentioned before the detective being brought back into the story. They kind of do the same thing they did in Squeeze in the sense of like he just kind of they're scanning the concrete to find a body, and then he just walks over randomly or rolls over and is like, "Oh, it's right here! It's here!" Like, why? How? Do you have some supernatural senses yourself? I don't know how you knew that there was something buried there.
right,
But that's a whole other that's a nitpick, but nonetheless, it's there. Overall, the episode just really, really works, uh, and it's creepy and so many fun details, and obviously, like you talked about things being dated, and this goes back to Squeeze as well. But like when they're using computers from 93, 94.
yeah,
Um, it's worth mentioning that, I mean, first of all, that's the period. So it's not laughable. I mean, I don't find it laughable when we go back to any period of time and you see what stuff was like then.
right,
But regardless, this is like the earliest days of computers being in more everyday use, increasing everyday use. Um, Obviously, being used in law enforcement and so much of the X Files. But and plus you see, I mentioned CSI and those kind of crime investigation shows. Moving forward, they do a lot of the stuff way worse.
right,
Even in the modern era, those shows do stuff that you're just like, "What are you talking about? That doesn't even make sense." That's not possible. And I feel like the X Files handles this stuff in a way more believable way, honestly, um, in terms of how technology would be used. It's also worth mentioning that the X Files is one of the earliest shows to be talked about on the internet. Maybe I think probably honestly the first show to be talked about on the internet to have like a early forum, early chat where people were talking online. Um, of course, also talking about shippers, the term shipper coming back to the X Files,
right,
coming from the X Files, where people were wanting Mulder and Scully to get together because that's what people do. Um, but whatever. Um, Not talking pro or con that, just saying that that's a thing. Um, but in general, just people talking about the show. online. Plus, the latter part of the seasons, Gillian Anderson was pregnant, so they started covering her in more and more layers to try and cover up the fact that she was getting more and more pregnant in the latter part of the season. So I find that kind of funny when you know about it, and you're like, "Why is Scully wearing so many layers?" Um, but nonetheless, just thinking about this episode in and of itself, Tooms is really great, solid A episode. Does a lot of the stuff that the Squeeze did, but just better and more involved. And I think it's cool in a way that I don't know what the thinking was to necessarily bring him back, but it might have been to say we're more sure of ourselves now and we have more of a budget.
Yeah.
So let's turn to that and see what we can do now. And it was worth it because they really do a lot with it. Now it's time for the season finale, the Erlenmeyer Flask, directed by R.W. Goodwin. His first episode. He will eventually have directed 9 episodes all the way to the end, which is the last episode done in Vancouver at the end of season 5. So he was an integral part of the show as it existed in Vancouver. And I think he does a great job in his first episode, the Erlenmeyer Flask, written by Chris Carter, which makes sense for a finale, premieres and finales. Um, Often see Carter there, the creator himself, doing that kind of thing. And I said that space was some of the worst aspects of what he can do, and I think Erlenmeyer Flask is some of the best, especially when it comes to what the X Files is. I mentioned it already, but we get Jerry Harden in this episode.
Yeah.
Jerry Harden is an important part throughout season 1, but in the episodes we're talking about, is only here.
Right.
We brought him in to kill him. But he is a great character, obviously inspired by Watergate. Um, the idea of Deep Throat is right there, and the idea of not trusting the government and having somebody being a whistleblower that's on the inside, revealing facts to important factions. Of course, in this case, not revealing them to journalists, but revealing them to FBI agents, which is interesting dynamic of the X Files. But there it is. Honestly, like if you just watch this episode, I think he's still really terrific, and you obviously get an immediate sense of who he is and what his dynamic is with the characters. Like they're not sure if they can trust him or not.
Right.
What's his information really saying? Is he leading us astray, or is he really telling us something vital? Um, all the way to the very end, which of course gives us is one of the best phrases from the show, trust no one, delivered at just the right moment. And also the first time that the show doesn't say the truth is out there at the end of the opening credits. It says trust no one, um, echoed by Deep Throat. But that idea is just right there in the DNA of the show. Obviously, you might like one aspect of the show more than another, and this is very heavily in that, partially in the mythology and the aliens and that kind of thing, but also in the government conspiracy side of it. I think that stuff is awesome. I think it's really well delivered in this episode. The idea of the alien blood and the gas that causes everybody to just go blind, in the moment.
Right.
That's really well done. The idea, I also really love the idea of uh, them finding clues that at first they're not even sure there are clues to be discovered. Like, what is there to look at? And they're very slowly figuring out the facts, all the way up until the point that we actually get our first alien that we see in the show. which I think is a really big moment, and I think it's a huge deal that it's Scully that's the one that gets the alien
Right.
out. What a cool detail! What a cool uh, way to deliver that. Um, and I think it's important that it's happened at this point in her character journey too, in relationship with Mulder and the X Files. Um, how about your feelings on the end of season one?
Well, this was just a culmination of a lot of what had been building up in those kind of episodes that we have not covered. the uh, so if people haven't uh, watched the series before, which you should, um, because I think that's the overwhelming answer here. Don't cherry pick our opinion about space and think that it applies to the rest of the series. Um, but
Only watch the worst and judge the
they're
whole
like, oh, I didn't like that astronaut character. I don't like this show.
show.
Uh, but I thinking back to things I love about X Files. One of the biggest things is the government conspiracy stuff and the alien, um, you know, high cover ups and everything like that. And I love uh, Deep Throat as a character. Jerry Harden was just awesome. Um, and in some ways, I wish there was more of him. Um,
Sure. Yeah.
I
Why the end of season one?
yeah, but also it's pretty great that he goes out the way he does when he does. And I eh, I think that is one of the like iconic things for me is that that last scene with him because it really sets the table for things to come, when you think about some of these other characters that are like him that come about and all these other figures that come out that want Mulder and Scully to trust them. And obviously you're left in this huge quandary of whether you can trust anyone or not. And it was going before this, but this was it really drove that home. But the episode itself is just kind of a thrill ride, really, in a lot of ways, because we open up with that chase, and we get green blood and so many other elements in this episode. Not to mention the alien fetus. Get a lot of get a lot of things kind of delivered in this episode. We've kind of been playing around with the idea of aliens for this whole season and maybe seeing them but not actually seeing them. But now no, this is indisputable. Now we're there, and I do love, like you, that it's Scully. And we'll talk about so much more as we go through the series of because this is just a step in the door, really, of all the things that come. But there's just so many elements here. I love. Well, I don't love him, but I love the aspect of the crew cut, man. I love like these, kind of government thugs that we get throughout the series. but I had kind of forgotten about him somehow. And I'm not really forgotten, but just, because there's so many other ones down the line. Um, but he was pretty great. Pretty great villain henchman. That exchange for Mulder, and then what happens with Deep Throat. It's just a very intense moment, and the stakes are so high at that point, and Scully, you can tell that she very much cares for Mulder, but also this is about this truth that she has gotten completely swept up in. Like watching this, it would be really. I don't know if I would like it, but it would be kind of interesting just to go one episode one and last episode. Uh, Talking because look where these characters are here, and look where they are here, and what a journey that this season is. Just this first season, and I'm tempted. I might end up. Am I going to contradict myself? I'm going to give it. I'm going to give it an A plus because it really is that good. I was kind of trying to talk myself down earlier, before but no, it really is that good.
Isn't it interesting sometimes when you're talking about it, you actually have to talk you're forcing yourself to talk out
Yeah,
what you think of a show and what it's about and what it means and all the details, and
right,
sometimes that helps inform, obviously, what you're gonna rate it.
right, and that's and that's exactly what's happening because it's just so representative of the show too. It this If there is an episode that we've talked about tonight that is very much an indicator of what the overall, maybe not themes, but the essence of what the X Files is, and really, you could make a case for some of the other ones too. But I feel like this one just kind of has all the big trappings and um, so much of the goodness that really makes it stand out. Uh, so I would award that to this episode, and it really is kind of it's a thriller. It's an action thriller, really, um, and it delivered on that. And as a television episode in the early '90s, um, steps so many steps ahead of what was out at the time, and it does it so well, and you really have to give it credit for that.
Yeah, I mean, I give it an A plus. I'm happy you found yourself there too, because I think it's just a tremendously emblematic episode of the show that's just very well executed from top to bottom. Um, and I was listening to the commentary by the director R.W. Goodwin, and he said that when Mulder is running, the company is so athletic himself. Like they tried to like at first use like a golf cart, and he kept out racing the golf cart to get the shots of him running. So they eventually got in the back of a pickup truck because they realized that the company wasn't gonna like slow down for the sake of the camera. Like he's always gonna go for it 100%. And I thought that was hilarious, but also very telling of who David Duchovny is, and his dedication to that part of it. And the show is, like I mentioned in the beginning, like there are so many different genres that the series touches on. Not as much in season one, but as it goes along, you get more and more stuff. There's humor in season one, but it's not very comedy. When we move forward, there are strictly comedy episodes.
Right.
But here we really get the action thriller version of the show, and that's a big part of the series. Is that part of it as well? And it works like gangbusters, including taking Mulder out basically for the last act. Um, really well done, and tells you a lot about where Scully's journey is and her integral nature to the whole thing. Um, but golly, like the whole thing is just so well done when it comes to like the mystery of it. Like you immediately get a sense of like, oh, there's something alien going on here. But you don't necessarily at this point in the series anticipate that they're actually going to show you an alien, or you're actually going to get to that point of even seeing a whole base of those naked dudes and tanks.
Right.
Um, which apparently they were actually naked in those tanks too. I guess there's a lot of just nudity in season one. People really willing to just take it off. Um,
Hutchison just, it
he
was
set the bar.
infectious.
Right. I guess they got these scuba divers to get in those tanks that they're experimenting on, and they were willing to get naked. I guess, according to Goodwin, there were a lot of people who wanted to visit the set when they were there. A lot of women staffers. I don't know what to make of that, but apparently there's a lot of people like, huh, naked dudes in tanks. I can't wait. Um, it's really great. But yeah, it's just a really well delivered. The whole mystery detective aspect of it, them like uncovering the truth as they go along, very well done. Really
Yeah.
great plotting. Whenever Scully's sneaking onto the base and she pulls purity control out of her, out of her head, just like at the last moment.
Right.
Woo! Great stuff and very tense. A+ episode. Um, we're cheating a little bit in the sense that, like, obviously, we're not talking about every episode. Um, because it would take forever. I mean, there's some part of me that's like, oh, I would watch it all again, but yeah, it would take a long time. Um, I like doing this version of it too, even if there's some stuff we're missing. But I would rate season one at an A- overall. I think it's really great. Has some of the best stuff in it. There are things where they're definitely getting their sea legs, so to speak, figuring out what the show is, getting better as they go along. Um, but overall, really excellent nonetheless at an A- for the whole season.
Yeah, that's exactly where I kind of fall too. Um, A minus is, for every Beyond the Sea um, level that they hit, or Erlenmeyer, Flask, they have a few missteps. I'm not going to say for everyone there's a space, because if there was a bunch of space like episodes, I will probably wouldn't be giving it an A minus. But
And again,
um,
I'm purposefully picking the worst
right,
episode from each season to be
right.
able to talk about the whole picture.
But I think overall, like the vibe and the mythology of the show, the characters of the show, and just um the themes of the show are so strong and so confident right out the gate, that even when maybe the episodes aren't as strong, they still have that little extra kick that maybe another show doesn't. And so, yeah, for it to start out at an A minus is pretty impressive, and especially considering we got space in there. So, but
And
again,
it's worth pointing out that the strongest episodes are towards the end, so you get the
yeah,
sensation that it's going to get better as it goes along, and it
right,
does.
yeah,
Yes, indeed. Trust no one. I would like to tease season two, the episodes that we're going to talk about in season two, whenever we do get a chance to get to that, in case anybody wants to watch the specific episodes we're going to be talking about. in season 2. I'll list them. Episode 1, again, from season 2 of The X Files. Episode 1, Little Green Men. Episode 2, The Host. Uh, Speaking of notable monsters of the week. Um, Episodes 5 and 6, Dwayne Barry and Ascension, two-parter. Uh, Episode 7, 3. Episode 22, you notice it's quite a jump from episode 7 to 22, um, as this stuff goes sometimes. But F Emasculata. And then finally the season finale, which is 25, is a particularly long season. Season 2 is. But Anasazi, episode 25. Um, those episodes, 7 episodes from season 2, whenever we do get an opportunity to talk about season 2. So hope anyone will join us, because I do think not only is the truth out there, but the show really grows here at this part, especially. And not to speak ahead of ourselves, but I think 2 is better than 1, and then the peak is 3, 4, and 5 of the entire series. And that doesn't mean that there's not great stuff after that too, because there is. But we'll get to it in due time. Um, in the meantime, my friend, pleasure as always
Indeed.
talking about this stuff with you. Certainly a pleasure revisiting, uh, as I have many times, one of my favorite television shows, in The X Files. Spending time with Mulder and Scully. More time as we go with Skinner. Perhaps we'll eventually see the lone gunman instead of just mentioning them. Uh, but we'll also get even more directors and writers as we go along, that are notable,
Right.
regardless of which. Hope everyone will tune in next time with us here on TV Binge Drinking. Thanks, everyone.